I'm Jesse Lubinsky.
I'm Donnie Piercy.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Heil, hosts of the Partial Credit Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. Welcome to the Hitech Podcast. If you didn't know, that's the podcast you're listening to right now. If you thought you were listening to like
surprise
the Friendship Onion or a much bigger podcast, or whatever that may be, you are listening to the Hitech Podcast, and good for you, because we're cooler. So welcome.
We're also the number 2 podcast in America, so may as well just go for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wait, what? Wait, what?
I would never claim to be the number 1 podcast.
Oh, but sorry. We can claim to be the number 2.
Probably the number, number 3.
We have the best podcast in the world. If people can say that about their coffee in whatever city they're in, we can say that about the Hitech Podcast without any issue. Anyway, I am Josh Schwartz, one of the hosts of the Hitech Podcast, and that other voice that you hear is, I know, it sounds good. It sounds smooth. That is Will Illingworth, the other host of the Hitech Podcast. What is up, Will?
What's up, my man? We chilling, we vibing, we having a great day, especially since we've finished the interview and we are just flying high from this interview that's behind us that we're about to introduce.
Exactly. If you're not in on what the interview is, that's what this episode is. So welcome to this episode. We have another guest joining us for
episode 138
of the Hitech Podcast. It's hard to believe that we are at that number, 5 away from 150, and we are not slowing down at all. We have a great guest, David Curran, who's joining us from Figma, or FigJam is the tool you might be familiar with, or Figma Design. We get into the details of what all of that means. I learned a lot on this episode, because I think I've always been a little bit confused about what's what at Figma, but we were super excited about this episode. We get to learn a little bit about how he's been using Figma, his history with Figma as a learning specialist, and crazy background as a teacher. This guy is
jack of all trades.
He's been
master
in a lot
of them too.
Stuff. Yes, he is. He is the most interesting man. I want to say alive because that's the statement, but that feels, when there is actually a Dos Equis commercial, that feels maybe less. We'll figure out the branding later. It'll be fine. But this is a great
workshop
episode.
That.
Yeah,
we'll brainstorm it in Figma.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna jam it out a little bit, if you will. Nailed it. Not quite as good as
jam
David
it like jazz.
Episode, but yeah, we're super excited. Great conversation. Will and I have actually already talked to David, so we know what's in this episode. Super excited about it, and without any more said, what's the point? You don't need to listen to the two of us anymore. Let's bring David in. It's way more entertaining with him involved. So, with that said, let's join David from Figma.
And that's a wrap. Just cut it. We've already had all the fun that we needed to have. No, that's a joke.
Why share it with people, private conversations, and then we don't share anything. We're just like, hey,
exactly.
We talked about stuff, listeners, and you don't get to hear any of it. That is
breaking the fourth wall with our friend and guest here, David Curran. We always do pre. We don't just hit record as soon as somebody shows up. That sounds like just a nightmare waiting to happen. That would be terrifying for a guest, I think. So we've been having a lot of fun already. We've been here for 20 minutes making jokes, having laughs. And now we're finally getting the chance to share it. So, David, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to join us nutballs over here at the Hitech Podcast. To get everyone situated, who are you? What's your background as an educator? Where are you today? What is your role at FigJam? Also, if you want to drop your social security number, just let us know.
I actually had to, copy paste. I just got to hit Control V. But first off, I will answer those questions, I promise. But Josh and William, I want to just say thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here on your podcast. Stoked to kind of share my journey as an educator, as well as some hopeful insights into where I kind of see education lacking and things that maybe, you know, Figma and FigJam could really fill in. But back to your questions. Who am I? Great question there.
It's not existential. We don't.
I
you
know.
don't need
I
to
know.
cancel our
hitters
How long
here.
do we have? We talked about 42 minutes left. I'll take 38 of those on number one. But no, I'm David. I live here on the Central Coast of California, and I've been in education for a little over 10 years. So I started off my teaching career in 3rd grade. I student taught in 3rd grade. So here in California, we have like a little apprenticeship, not sure what it's called out there, but I was a student teacher. And halfway through that, my advising teacher told me that she was retiring and that I should have her job. And I said, that sounds great, but I don't think it's that easy. However, just through a couple of different connections, and I just really putting myself out there. Like, I led a staff meeting as a student teacher. I'm like, hey, principal, like, put me in front of everyone. I want to show you what I can do.
Call me up, giddy up. Wow.
I know. It was wild. So just like really trying to run with it and grow as I went. And that eventually that student teaching position turned into a full-time position. So I mean, that's like a whole episode we could get into, but yeah, started off doing 3rd grade and did that for a few years, then did 4th grade for a few years. Did some summer school 5th grade because I want to keep the cycle here, and then taught most recently. I'm teaching. I came out of teaching 6 months ago and was teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade precision manufacturing, engineering, and design at a middle school here in California.
What?
Wow.
Precision manufacturing to middle school?ers?
Yeah, so if you're like asking, wait, I've never heard of this class before, it's because I made it up. I had some incredible administrators that just kind of trusted the process that I had been a part of. I started doing 3D printing with 3rd graders back in like 2015, 2016. And from there, just got to help like build out our school district's innovation, where we were able to outfit 9 of our elementary schools with maker labs, 3D printers, laser cutters. So I was very much into innovation, just even starting with these younger kids. And from there, just built a love for engineering, self-taught design and CAD programs, and just got really into how ignited I saw my students becoming when they were jumping into these programs and these platforms that really had a design focus. And I just kind of started following the interest of students, just really tried to be a watchful educator that was in tune with what they were hungry for. And that turned into just like a very circuitous route leading me to teach middle school. But I kind of pitched this idea of teaching more like kind of CTE, career and technical education aligned courses, got my CTE credential in the process, and then was able to kind of make up this class called Precision Manufacturing and Design, and super, super exciting.
And what was the subject matter in 3rd grade, 4th grade? What were you teaching before engineering,
Like the subject matter in 3rd grade was just classic, your 3rd grade reading,
everything,
writing,
right?
everything,
Like
math.
reading, math.
Yeah. So which was a great foundation, honestly, for kind of where I went, because I think it's just, incredible to be able to see education from that multifaceted, multi-subject viewpoint.
Next, I think you're going to tell us that you're a 3-star Michelin chef. Like what else? You got esports? You got a full-time esports club?
Yeah. I think the closest is that I roast my own coffee, but that's it.
That takes effort, and I respect
you got
it.
Will. Yeah, you got Will on that one.
I don't roast. I just grind and pour over, but I
for
do
now,
more-
Will
that's
eventually
more than
start
most people.
roasting.
Yes. Amazing.
Yeah. I pull mine out of a bag and I put it in the coffee maker, and then I kind of roll with that direction. That's so
Perfect.
Yeah. See, David's encouraging. I like David.
Hey, I will say this, that I am way too into coffee. I'm ratios, measuring everything out. I'm roasting my own, right? Like, who does that? I also love, like, after an early morning, like, bike ride or surf, like, just a 7-Eleven, terrible, watery cup of coffee. Give it to me. So, I'm in all of that.
Yeah.
Now,
I
David,
dig
I'm
this.
I'm going to come back to the beginning of our talk and say that maybe you do need some mental health support for that. Come on, friend. Don't treat yourself that
I
way.
know. I think sometimes you have to appreciate the finest of things in life and also some of the simpler things as well in unison.
Yeah.
I was thinking I was going to find my coffee rig on the spot and do the classic, like, show you the cell phone on the webcam thing. I'll just send you a picture later. But respect. So I'm glad we've got the most important things here. You're the most interesting teacher in the world. You're the Dos Equis of education. Great.
Wow, what an honor! I think I can leave now. I'm gonna sign off, and
that's a wrap.
Now I really want to make the Dos Equis commercial for education. That seems like a great Hitech Podcast.
Swartzy.
David, if you want to join in, I'm all behind this. So
I'll get the grays going a little bit more, and I can be the Dos Equis guy. Yes.
Mark that down on some show notes here. You should frame David in the kind of the Dos Equis style for the episode page. Just saying, not saying, just saying.
I love that idea.
So let's bridge. We've got a great picture of you, and I'm thrilled to have this picture. It's indelible. It's gonna stay with me. Where does Figma come into play? Are you using it as a teacher? Are you doing it as, part of the CAD process or design process, and then you just fall in love with it? Or did someone knock on your day one day and be like, Curran, calling you up?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was during the pandemic. I actually made the switch from teaching elementary school to teaching middle school during the pandemic, which was fascinating because my first day teaching middle school was on Zoom. So I'd never taught a middle schooler before. And my first hello to any, 13-year-old was on this thing called Zoom that we all eventually had to learn. So it was a very interesting time to start teaching middle school, but I just had such a big heart for these kids and always felt like I wanted to keep going higher and older in the students that I taught. So I was teaching middle school, and I had this whole plan on teaching precision manufacturing, getting into laser cutting, 3D printing. But when the pandemic happened, it just didn't work out to be able to run the 3D printers, bring kids in. I had this whole idea of a print factory, but just wasn't going to work out. So they actually changed my course to be just graphic design, which I knew absolutely nothing about. And I'm like,
surprise.
Okay, surprise. I tried to pitch them to teach students how to roast coffee, but they said no. So then I'm like, okay, graphic design. I kid you not, I tried to teach an entire, and this was like trying to get kids ready for career readiness. I wanted it to blend into our high school CTE programs. And I'm like, what programs do we have? They were cutting a lot of stuff. So they're kind of like, figure it out. It has to be web-based, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, oh gosh. So I started teaching graphic design in Google Slides. It was like, wow. I know you were impressed by the other things. This one brings me back a little bit. Maybe this puts me right in line for a 7-Eleven coffee, but
That's the quality we're talking.
I know, but I loved that tool. I felt like fluent in it, and then the students were familiar with it. It was free. They had access to it. And it wasn't until like a couple of weeks that I had a kid actually crying in my office hour. They had this idea of what they wanted to make, and they couldn't make it due to some of the constraints. So I went on a bit of a search. I'm like, okay, what can I use? I had a pretty heavy ask of the tool that I needed. It had to be web-based. It had to be free for education. And there were two more things. It had to be collaborative, and also had to be focused on industry, or it had to be like an industry standard tool. Because I just felt like if I'm going to introduce something new to my students, I want it to be I want to maximize their experience and exposure to something that they could very well use in a line of work down the road. So they're not going to be doing graphic design in Google Slides. So I remember asking a buddy who's a designer. I was at a barbecue during the pandemic one day. I'm like, hey, I have kids. They're just like not stoked on how I'm teaching, or the ways in which I'm asking them to create content. Have you heard of anything that has these like 4 asks? And I'm thinking I'm not getting anything back. And
also, it needs to make julienne fries if you get the reference.
But exactly, yes. So it seemed impossible to find something until a buddy was like, "You should check out Figma. I think it's free for education." And at this point, I didn't know anything as far as like design lingo so I asked him like, oh, and is there a pen tool that can do the bendy things? And I didn't know what the bendy things were. They're called handles. And so I asked for bendy things, and which I don't know, maybe if that ties into your French fry analogy, but he's like, yeah, try Figma. There's a pretty robust pen tool. So I started playing around with it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually pretty rad. I got kids into a file together, and there's all these like cursors that fly around. It's a multiplayer model, so you can actually see where everyone is on the canvas. And I was just like blown away by what we were able to do and create, one with the tools in line within Figma design, but then the collaborative piece of designing side by side and designing together just like blew me away. So I kind of started just living and breathing, and yes, even dreaming in Figma design. And I know, it was wild. And then they came out with a tool called FigJam, which is our whiteboarding tool that I spend a lot of time in. And I was like, wow, this is another game changer. And then started actually pursuing understanding graphic design, understanding ways that you could do project mapping, group brainstorm, and really wanted to align my class as closely, or to mimic as closely, like a working model, what students might experience if they're in, whether it be a design job or an architecture job, or they're just working in like a brainstorm. It was very easy to create those learning opportunities because it's a tool that like Netflix uses when they're using their front end design, or a lot of companies, actually Fortune 500 companies, use when they're doing prototyping of their apps, or they're doing brainstorms in our whiteboarding software called FigJam. So it was a big win for everything I was looking for.
Absolutely. That's really interesting because to connect some background into this, David, I knew Figma outside of education for a little while. So and didn't really know that Figma was getting in. As somebody who's on a Edtech podcast, I probably should have known this earlier, but somehow didn't know they were getting into the education game until Will and I are at ISTE, and I'm like, oh wait, Figma has an education plan? Is this a thing that exists? Because I knew Figma from UX background, that is where I had originally come into touch with Figma. Was through like you said, UX prototyping, creating interfaces, things like that. It had come up in some of the UX design training I was going through, and some of the UX stuff I was doing for designing online courses. And so when I saw Figma in education, it was really interesting. I was like, oh, cool. First of all, now I can get an account. That's cool. Because I could originally get access. But then
unlimited files. Yeah.
But then it was cool to see them
just
getting
3.
Yeah, getting into education a bit. So you've already started to talk about this a little bit, but I think for our listeners, and Will and I, for background, those who might be listening to this episode who didn't listen to the last episode, we did talk about Figma a little bit on a previous episode on the podcast, but we didn't get into a lot of detail. So I'm curious, from somebody who, this is your focus, working with people and learning in Figma, so we've got FigJam, we've got Figma as kind of the company and the tool, and I know how it kind of connected maybe a little bit into your graphic design. But for those who might not be teaching that, and are thinking, what is Figma for me? How does this tie into my education space? Talk a little bit about what all does Figma offer, and how have you seen it connected to education a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what are the figs? That's a great question. So you said it perfectly, Josh. Figma is the company. Figma Design is the design software. And all the stuff is web-based. When we came out in 2015, we wanted all of, Figma wanted, I say when we came out in 2015, I was not at the company at all. I was teaching. But Figma always had this hope to just create access and to break down barriers for people to have access to really quality software and tools. So being web-based was a non-negotiable. So our design software, which is Figma Design, I know it's weird, it has the name of the company in the title of it, but it's exactly what you're mentioning, Josh, for UX UI, which is user experience, user interface for listeners that don't know. That's like when you're on an app, let's say if you're on Airbnb and you're going through and you're wanting to input a text field, you're going to have to find that button and input the text field, and then it might load you to another page. There might be an animation between. A lot of that is designed in Figma design, and then it gets handed off to a developer who codes it and programs it, or a team of developers that then create it so that it can be living and breathing on your phone. But that all has to be designed first. So Figma was really this huge problem solver where a lot of handoff between what was designed and then what was developed was really tricky and hard. So that's where kind of Figma took off. And then FigJam is where I'd like to focus a lot of listeners and try to inspire people, because it's our FigJam, saying it again, another fig, but FigJam is the whiteboarding tool.
Slightly more delicious.
Slightly more delicious, and also confusing because there's this thing called Jamboard. Another jam comes into the mix, not a fig, but a jam. So it's like all these things here. But if you aren't, I do bring that up because if you are familiar with Jamboard, that was a whiteboarding tool, or still is, but is soon going to be deprecated fully, is a whiteboarding tool that Google put out. And we are actually working closely with Google to ensure that folks do understand that FigJam's a pretty good replacement. I would say a pretty fantastic replacement for folks. So when you think about digital whiteboarding, it's a little bit different than a pagination model. So for listeners, if you're imagining like a Google Docs, you got page 1, page 2, page 3. I prefer pageless, but we won't go there. Then if you know like a Google slide, you got like slide 1, slide 2. So these are all like pagination models, right? You have the pages and you can go through them sequentially. And Jamboard was similar. So Jamboard was a digital whiteboard and had these pages you could go through. One of the things that FigJam wanted to create was a space where people could truly dream up and think up and brainstorm these ideas that could hopefully soon be turned into reality or could be turned into design. And so FigJam does not have pages. It is not a pagination model. It is an infinite canvas. So I liken FigJam operates a little bit more like a Google Maps, where you can zoom in, you can zoom out. And I know, so a lot of zoomage. And don't know if that's a word, but we're rolling with it. Folks.
It should
Works
be.
for
If
me.
it's not, I love
Should
it.
be.
So we're gonna
I think
go
it's
with it.
actually that is our technical term here at Figma. But one of the like things around this, and you can create what are called sections, which I try to steer teachers towards thinking of your sections kind of like your pages. So you can create these spaces where text can be, where you can add sticky notes, you can add in different elements. Multimedia works really well, YouTube videos, you can add in Google Docs, flip videos. So FigJam's a space where you're not so much limited by this 16 by 9 or this 8.5 by 11 space, which we often use in education. Like I used that when I was a kid, it was just printed out. And then when the rise of Chromebooks came in, we used the same thing, but we just had it on the computer. So FigJam, I feel like, really solves the problem of limiting space and allows for your ideas to grow and for the space they're contained in to grow as well. So you can adapt the size of your sections, you can add in multiple sections, you can build your file like left to right, top to bottom, you can build it diagonal if you want to. There's really kind of a user-focused and intended, way of like approaching the canvas. Even there's no like here are your pages, which is like if you're on a slide deck, that's kind of how you work through it, is like top to bottom. So I feel like that's pretty cool because it can be used in a variety of ways. And that's FigJam, kind of like our online whiteboarding tool that we're seeing teachers use for many different use cases.
One of my first interactions with a tool like this, probably 2017, won't name it, it's a competitor, but the goal...
We're all here
if
for
you want me
students.
to.
We're all here for students. No, I want to hear.
I think it was Lucid, when not. I don't. They've changed their names today too, because Lucid Spark and Chart and this and that. But it was Lucid Chart, I think then.
Awesome.
But the point that the faculty member came to me with was, I need to create a gallery walk, right? I want to have my students visit stations virtually. And it was going to be for what they'd usually do as a student expo, but it was part of a larger university system. So typically those expos were limited to campus, and this program lived across several. So they wanted to do one finally that could be inclusive of all of the campuses that participated in that academic program. So we wanted something that we could have in a shared infinite space, section by section, folks could move around from. And it worked. You know, I can't say that it had the same experience somebody wanted to have of walking around a room in a gallery walk, right? But like, it allowed us to create something that was outside of that paginated experience that most digital tools are still stuck in. And I agree with you. I agree with what I was hearing subliminally.
Yeah.
Pagination is trying to square peg round hole something, right? The internet, the digital world gives us the opportunity for infinite.
Yeah.
And we were trying to fit everything into the box, you know, that is Pages. So I'm really happy to hear that FigJam delivers that way. Josh and I have worked in Figma directly. I don't think we've used Jam, right, dude?
No, not for us. We've used, for the consulting work that we do, we've used Figma for asset design and stuff for e-learning modules and things like that, and it's been great. Other than Will and I realized maybe the max of what we should have put in a board, but that was less Figma's problem and more our computer's problem. We would open the board and it was like, you've got way too many avatars in here, bro.
It would just freeze.
Well, I love that.
It's file size and there's a lot of an os for what we were doing.
You got to go for it. But I think what's cool about what you're saying is this is a tool adults are using, and we're also seeing second and third graders in Japan and even a lot of other parts around the U.S. They're using a tool that even their parents are posting about using on Twitter, and so you see this thing that students are able to have access to. And I was blown away with my sixth graders using Figma design. I was like, oh, it's gonna be too hard for them, and then within 2 weeks they're better than me. But it's incredible where
Mr. Curran, did you see how I could do this?
I know. No, honestly, again, just eyes on kids. What are they doing? I'm following them. Following the youth.
I remade your outfit in Figma. Look, you're so cool.
Oh, you have the Dos Equis outfit on. It's great. Honestly, it was. I'm always so humbled by the ideas and even the empathy these kids have. And then it's so cool where literally you're seeing, the youth doing things that are beyond what I think are possible in a tool. And I'm an adult, I'm constantly bogged down by limitations or, being too conservative on something, and they just run with it. And I think that's what's fantastic about our program, Figma for Education, is really trying to give kids access to these tools that adults are using, that they might very well use down the road, whether it be for asset design or for prototyping something or creating some sort of font library or design system. I think it's, no matter what field they go into, knowing how to design is really important and becoming increasingly important down the road in lots of fields of work.
I'll just say it briefly so it gets into our SEO. The fact that there's AI these days is going to be a need we need designers. The more that we can automate, the more that the bots can do the work around us. People still need to design what it's doing in the first place. We may not develop much in the future, right? You've got literally AI-driven tools like Copilot that are helping people code automatically, artificially. And it's like, all right, well, there we go. I checked the box for the SEO for this episode, but also it's legitimate. We need more design tools because that's where humans are essential. You cannot. My mind can immediately see the Terminator worlds where the robots are, designing because they've become sentient. But for now, that is not the world we live in.
Yeah. And I love go for it. Jump in.
How can educators get started? I mean, as simple as what's a good link? What do we need to Google? But where does somebody need to go if they want to get started with Figma? Figma for Education, aka FigJam, or those are separate? So it's Figma for Education. It's a program, and we're going to get to use FigJam.
Yeah, so we have a couple different spaces teachers can go to. The one I would probably point teachers in, which is the easiest one, is figma.com/education. Yes, we can probably all remember that word.
That's hard to remember.
The education. Yeah, that's FIGMA, figma.com/education. It'll be in the show notes. Yeah. And then from there,
this is your show, that's how you take care of people.
We joked about me overtaking this podcast, and I really hope.
Yeah, I'm not sure we mentioned that on the episode, just so you guys know. David is not trying to take over the episode.
Welcome to our third host.
Yeah, we're giving the podcast to David at this point. That's he deserves it. He's a cool mic.
No. Yeah, so figma.com/education, and there's a couple things when you're kind of scrolling through here. The first button you'll see is where you can get verified, and if you are a legit educator, you teach a class that is K-12 or university, you can go ahead and get verified with your education account. And then if you kind of keep scrolling through that, you'll see both an introduction to what FigJam is, as well as what Figma design is. And there's a whole bunch of fun clickable links on there.
I love it.
Yeah, I will say as somebody who's used it, like that's what I signed up for through our institution. Like it was super easy to get an account and get started and jump into it. The education side, it was pretty seamless, it's cool. It's not always that way on tools. There are a lot that are, but there are definitely there are definitely some that Will and I are like, are you trying to hide your education plan? I kind of feel like you are.
Yes. Yes. Some brands are doing that.
Yeah, one thing to note for listeners as well is, that's how you get in as like an individual. But if you are wanting to use Figma with students, you do have to go through an official deployment. Just we want to make sure students' privacy is protected and all that jazz. So you can go to figma.com, another slash for you, Chromebooks. Even if you don't have Chromebooks, you can go to figma.com/Chromebooks. Even if you have all Apple products, or you just you don't even use technology. That'd be a tricky one. But you're an outdoor school, the trees. So no, if you go there, you can actually apply, and we can get you set up for an official deployment, and it's 100% free. I want to make that clear, as we're not going to charge. We're not going to all of a sudden have a paywall, or you've used it for 100 hours, now you have to pay us, or you have these 3 files. For education, it's free for students and teachers, and we are able to keep it free because we also have an enterprise plan that like Netflix and Uber and all of them pay for, but you still have to pay for those products when you use them. So
okay,
I love
That's
that.
Really cool.
I just wanted to. I was just like, I'll just give it a shot. Figjam.com/iPads. Like maybe there'd be a redirect. No, it goes right straight to a 404. So definitely go to /Chromebooks.
Yeah, Figma.com/Chromebooks. Also, fun fact: if you go to Figma.com/Chromebooks currently, and I don't know if this is still going to be true for people listening in the future, but there's a cool hero video of my students using Figma design.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, go check it out.
That's super cool.
Love that.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Now, I want to shift gears here for a second. I'm going to go off our script just for a hot second, but not that we followed it very closely in our conversations. People who have been listening to us for a while are like, Josh, we know. You guys
did David write the script?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. David, I want to talk just a brief. We didn't really get to it in the beginning. What do you do for Figma specifically? I think that would be helpful for people.
Sure.
Some of kind of your learning specialist background and what you're doing. I think it'd be helpful for people to kind of understand that connection. And what you're doing and how you connected to education with Figma. I realized we skipped over it. I was like, we probably would have been good to talk about that
that's a great question. Well, other than running this podcast for Figma, I also...
Wait, they sponsor? Okay.
No, hey, hashtag not a sponsor yet.
Oh, great question. So when I was actually teaching last year and I saw this job posted, I was like, okay, I'm not going to leave education. I can't. Being in front of students is too important to me. I saw in this job description an incredible opportunity to impact education at a larger scale and at a scale that I hadn't quite really dreamed up of yet. And so in my role, it's like my dream job. So I'm so excited to talk about this. In my role, I do a couple of things. One of those things is as the learning specialist here at Figma for education, I train teachers and staff on how to use the tool. So if someone does go through an official deployment, we offer them a training. That could be a training for a school site or a group of tech coaches, and I get to do the training. It's so fun. I get to work with educators and show them this tool. I'm usually demonstrating FigJam, and what's great about this is they're actually in the file with me. So it's not like, here's my 10-point slide presentation. It's like, hey, here's a file. Here's a couple things, and then let's jump into it. And we try to get our hands dirty pretty quickly. And I just love that cooperative learning model that the platform is able to host so well. So those are really fun for me. I do a couple trainings a week, sometimes a lot more than that. And then I'm also part of my job here is content creation. So I get to make these fun videos that are on YouTube, as well as starting to kind of dip my toes into TikTok, as well as making stuff on Twitter. So yeah, I get to do some content creation. I also get to work with kind of outreach a little bit and getting to connect with teachers and just say, hey, like, how like can this tool become better? I get to kind of see what are some pain points for teachers currently, and maybe how could FigJam or Figma design help solve some of those problems they're seeing, whether it be in their classrooms or more from a meta lens of education in general. So there's a ton of problem solving and a ton of creativity in this role that I get to steward. And I directly am working with teachers, which is so fun. That was like a huge must for me, is if I do leave the classroom, I want to be very much impacting education. And that's, just a little bit of the things that I get to do.
All right, you're hired. We accept your application to be the third host. This is, we accept.
Yeah.
No,
I just thought that was cool, for the listeners to hear, because I know they're different tools who handle this differently. And what I've really liked about Figma in some of the other tools we've even had on the podcast is this commitment to bringing in actual educators to help other educators think through the use of the tool. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, and one thing that came up during my interview was they asked me if I was teaching during the pandemic, and I was like, yes, I was teaching during the pandemic. And even like Figma's insight on like the type of educator, that the level of experience and exposure they wanted that teacher to have gone through, even coming off the coattails of the pandemic, I think there's a different vernacular and a different tenor and tone that comes when having to talk to teachers, because so much has happened, and still there's ripple effects of that season. It seems like many seasons, what COVID was, but yeah. So I think I was like blown away by that interview process, and just the team that I get to be a part of. It's such an honor.
Super cool.
Awesome. All right. I think the last thing to tease folks with would be anything. It could be nothing. Is there anything new? Is FigJam bringing out a new TikTok feature or something that's going to hook all the kids? Like, is all right. I just shouldn't have said that way, but
no.
Coffee maker.
I love it.
Is FigJam releasing a coffee maker? That would be great.
Is there a line of jams coming out? Just want to know.
Yes.
Oh, I really wish. I'm more of a marmalade guy, but
you would.
I actually am not. I'm kind of like committed to the raspberry jam, and
a one jam guy. I like it.
Well, it's just so transferable. You can do so much with it. The almond butter, the chocolate. Okay, back to your question. So, new things coming out. Well, one of the things that really kind of interested me in this company was how innovative the company is, and things are constantly changing. Not from like, oh my gosh, like I love this feature and now it's gone sort of thing, but they really do adapt the UI, which is the user interface, to try to make it as seamless and as usable as possible. So I love just how there's like these little micro tweaks that are constantly coming out to make the user's experience of the tool better. So that's kind of something, as you're in the tool and if you follow it and use it, you'll start to see over time that's pretty cool. We're also exploring with more AI features and really trying to see like, and this is something that I do want to preface with, is that currently, and this might all change, but currently our AI features are turned off if you're going through the official deployment with Figma. Okay. Being that the terms of service with OpenAI, we just don't want to just all of a sudden allow kids to use things that they aren't actually legally allowed to. So currently it's turned off, but there's some really cool AI features. Like if you're just signing as a teacher, you don't have the official deployment, you can plan out like these lessons. You can use generative AI to create sets of notes, or even to create like 32 different sticky notes of ideas that maybe you could copy and paste into another FigJam for students. And let's say if you have 36 different sticky notes from a brainstorm, you can use AI to synthesize those notes into action items. So there's some pretty cool stuff coming out. And we're just, trying to see and explore, like with this new era of AI, there's like, what are we really trying to do with the tools, and how are we really trying to do the best thing? I think one of the things, back to your point, William, about AI and jobs and even like the future, is like AI is incredible. It truly does lower the floor and raise the ceiling for what is attainable for students. And I think I also believe, and our CEO Dylan Field also mentions this, is that AI is a great place for a wonderful like first draft, but it's going to be like hard to make like a world-class product solely off of AI. You're going to have that like vision of design, of empathy, of like how it can be used and how humans are going to respond to it. I think if you are going to create a world-class product, it'd be really hard to circumvent the human experience and touch. And so looking at like our tools, like how can we work with AI to create, like maybe a lot of people freak out when they jump into like a blank page. Like, how do I start? How can we try to accelerate the process of generating ideas, capturing ideas, project mapping, so that the chasm between idea and product is shortened, and that people can create really cool things. And when I say product, I mean like lesson or learning activity from more of an educational standpoint. So it's really about how can we create or like even widen the tent using these tools for people to be inside and creating awesome stuff. Sorry, I like went on like a side tangent.
No, loved it. Tripled down on the AI SEO. Thank you. But besides the fun of that, right? What you said about lowering the floor, raising the ceiling, I've never heard that. I like how you said that. But I hope folks can hold on to what that means by that imagery, right? I think there's an equity point there that's significant to the opportunity AI offers. When we think about floor, we think about the lowest point to access, and still in the 21st century where Wi-Fi is almost everywhere, there are districts that barely have it. There are districts that don't even have an iPad in the building. And that's just US, thinking through the US. Like, we've got international brothers and sisters across the world who are dealing with lack of internet, and yet if we could just get that hardware level up, AI is bringing the software so far down that, and I have worked, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a coder, I'm not a developer. I've used AI to like figure some stuff out when it comes to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. Right? Like the floor is low enough for me to stub my toe on it and get on the platform. So
I love that.
I really love that. Wow, David, you've jam-packed this episode with so much content.
I love it.
But beyond that, I'm just elated. You've really brought all of us up. It's been a positive, upbeat conversation, and I don't even felt like you were trying to sell anything. I don't think you were, right?
Well,
you made the point that you got here because you've used it.
Yeah, good point.
Can
it's
I
all
sell
free.
you
What are
free?
you trying to sell?
Yeah, exactly.
This is gonna be the worst deal for me. Can you please take it? Yeah.
Well, I know if you get them hooked on Figma and FigJam, it's going to be the merch line. You know, that's where the real money is, right? If you get people to buy in on
when they release their jams, they'll be making tons of money. You know, that'll be the
we're gonna do
that's
that.
the sell. We know that's the plan. That's where it's going. You know, get the schools, then you give them the jam. That's where it's going.
I love it.
Anyway,
perfect. Thank you. We'll wrap the episode here. We really appreciate your time with us, and we hope that you'll be back, whether as a Figma representative or as just David Curran, here to be the third host and lift the podcast up.
Well, thank you so much. Josh,
the coffee
it's been an
episode.
absolute honor. The coffee episode. Well, yes, we'll get into that one. Will be a grind, but it'll be great. I think
We're done. We're done there. Thank you.
I'm out. Cheers, y'all. We'll see you later. Thank you again.
Amazing. Wow. I don't know how we continue to make the podcast better every episode. I do feel that way. I'm not just being silly. Every person we meet, every new friend of the podcast who becomes a part of our community just lifts us up. Josh and I, seriously, David, we're having a little bit of a day. It was a little rough, and we got on to prep with you, and we just had a great time laughing, and then that interview was fantastic. So thank you for lifting us up, and we hope as well that our listeners will be really just enlightened by that. It was a sweet conversation, and that's just true of any time you've got jam involved with things, even though he claims to be a marmalade guy. I don't know, whatever. The benefit of this conversation is folks who have not heard about Fig before, FigJam, Figma, what's possible with these tools, right? So not only was David doing it, and he used it in class, and he knows what that's like, we've used it ourselves a little bit. You can get a sense for what it can do. If you still are wrestling, it's infinite, over 9,000, infinite space. You can literally just scroll out. If you need more space, if you're working on something, if you're typing something, if you created a sticky note, if you're creating an image, you're creating an object, just scroll out. There you go. You got more space. click and drag it, move over to the left a little bit, start fresh. You've got more space, and it's got tools where you can make sections and put frames and stuff, and you can make little group areas for students to work in each little group around the board or the Figma, the FigJam. So it's a great tool. There's proof in what we're talking about. You know, of course, David's with the company now, and he's got a great opinion of it. We do too. We're not sponsored. # currently. Love that. But we stand by it. It works, does the trick, and we love something that's free for educators, right? That's free is our aesthetic. We love when something is easily available to educators. So just rolling with it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I was really encouraged by this episode because I've talked before in the podcast a little bit about for me, Figma came out of a different background, and then FigJam kind of came in and was kind of in a spot where I already kind of had an app that I already had filled that hole with, and it was not Google. So when that fell through, I was not panicking like the rest of everybody else. I already had a solution, and I've been encouraged by looking at FigJam more and their connection to the larger kind of design world. I think there's a lot of power in that as an app that's already being used in other places that can help prepare students. And I will say it on the podcast. Them having an education plan that involves implementation without more money involved is a big deal. The competitor that I'm thinking of that I have liked a lot, they don't. And it has stopped us from more wide adoption at our institution because I have no money to buy any more tools. There's none there. And so I think that's really cool. And I think that's I think it's a good strategic move in Figma's point, because really what they're doing is they're making themselves a little bit more ubiquitous in the environment, and I think we'll see themselves become more of a used tool in other areas because of that. So I think that's really cool, and just the energy they're investing in educators and education, I think is a really cool thing. And so definitely go check it out. All the links that David talked about in the episode will be in the episode page that you're listening to here now. If you don't know where it's at, we'll talk about that in a second, but you can go find that information and go check it out. Even if you haven't played with it, or you already have a tool you're already using, test that space out. I really think there's a lot of power in these digital whiteboard tools that people are missing out on because they think of it as just a basic whiteboard, but the reality is really it's such an open learning environment that I personally think is some of the future of the way we interact online with content that I think a lot of I'm not getting on this soapbox right now, but I think a lot of learning management systems aren't getting. They aren't understanding. And so I think places like FigJam and other tools in that environment are some places we need to get used to as educators and learn how to use a bit better. So
yeah. To keep us on the roast of coffee topics, you know, I see FigJam as a free product. Like most folks want to like turn things. I've turned away a free cup of coffee before. I'm not feeling it, or I'm a little offended. Turkey Hill or 7-Eleven. Free coffee is not always that it's cracked up to be. Figma and FigJam for free is what it's cracked up to be. I mean, it's worth getting in there and trying it out. I think that the idea of working in a page with 30 students is nauseating, right? Have you ever put a Google Doc together and you put 30 little names running? I've been there. I've done it in conferences. I've done it with teachers. If you get too many people in a page, in a document, a traditional document, it doesn't work. It's not great. It's going to lead to more social issues and classroom management issues, et cetera, et cetera. With Figma, you can put 4 students here, 4 students here, 4 students there. Just break them up, set them into different areas, but you can quickly, in the virtual space, travel to all of those and even tell the students to visit each other and check it. Like it's as close to the virtual. It's actually as close to the metaverse as I'd like to get with education, right? Yeah. You can create a virtual space, a shared space that includes on-task subjects, and you can build third spaces, off-task subjects in the same Jamboard. In the same FigJam. That's the wrong word. My bad. I'll not edit that later.
I didn't even catch it. I was just like, oh, okay.
That sounds like the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It will be eventually. When Jamboard deprecates, you'll just be using FigJam, so it'll be perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I'm here for it. I'm behind this stuff. So please do check it out. Head over to Figma. Check out the episode page. Where can you find that episode page?
What
As
a great
always,
question.
with the Hitech Podcast. You can find our episodes and our social content on Twitter and YouTube at Hitech Podcast. You can email us. That's how this episode came to be. There was an email exchange with David and team. Very good. Email us. You can get on the podcast at inbox@hitechpod.us. And lastly, the website, hitechpod.us. Every single one of our episodes has an episode page, including this episode, where you can find resources, stuff that Josh puts together for us out of the show notes. So you can find David, you can find FigJam, Figma, Figma for Education, config, all the fig things. But unfortunately,
Except for Fig Newtons.
not.
I don't think you can actually find those there, but
That's
you can go buy
copyright.
them, eat them while you're doing it. It's fine. It's, yeah.
Exactly. So that's the shtick. Thanks for another episode of the Hitech Podcast, episode 145. Episode 146 will be the end of season 6. We're very excited for it, whatever it ends up being. We don't know yet. We'll find out when we get
fourth
there.
wall fact. Will and I always tell you guys on the podcast when we're recording episodes out of order. This is super past Will and Josh talking to you. We have no idea what has happened between now and April when this episode has released. So who knows?
Yep.
It'll be
Enjoy.
It'll be good time.
Yeah. So until then, folks, thank you again for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology in the virtual Fig space or in the real world, classrooms, whether online or in person. As always, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.